We found a survivor in the forest. He says the Wendigo let him go. I work with a volunteer search and rescue team deep in northern Montana. The kind of place where the trees grow too close together, where the wind howls through the mountains like an animal in pain, and where, if you're not careful, you can step off a trail and never be found again. Our job usually involves lost hikers, twisted ankles, the occasional bear encounter. But last week, something different stumbled into our lives. Something we should never have found. It was almost midnight when we saw him emerge from the tree line near the abandoned fire trail. He was barefoot, the soles of his feet torn and bleeding, leaving a trail of dark stains in the snow. His skin was deathly pale, lips cracked and bleeding, his hands hanging limp at his sides like broken marionettes. His clothes were in tatters, nothing more than strips of soaked fabric clinging to a frame that looked barely human. He didn't speak, just collapsed face first into the snow. We rushed to him, wrapping him in blankets, calling in our medic. His body was ice cold. For a moment, we thought he was dead. But then, a shallow, ragged breath escaped his lips. At first, we thought he was just another lost hunter. Happens often enough. People think they know these woods. They don't. We bundled him back to base camp, got him near a heater. Someone tried offering him a thermos of soup. His reaction was violent. He recoiled so hard, he overturned the cot, thrashed until two of us had to hold him down. His voice, when it came, was cracked and raw. "It let me go," he whispered. "It let me go." He wouldn't say his name, wouldn't answer questions, wouldn't look us in the eye, just sat curled in the corner, rocking slightly, muttering that same phrase over and over. We decided to let him rest, though none of us truly thought he would sleep. There was something about the way he stared, not at us, but through us, like we weren't really there at all. I drew the short straw and stayed with him while the others responded to a call about another missing hunter a few miles east. It was just the two of us in the infirmary tent. I sat by the heater, pretending to read, while he watched the wall, unmoving. Minutes dragged into hours. Snow fell harder, hissing against the canvas. The shadows from the heater flickered and danced along the walls, giving the illusion that things were moving just beyond my vision. Without warning, he spoke again. "We weren't supposed to be there," he said, voice barely a rasp. "It was hunting season. Elk. We wanted the trophy, the bragging rights. So we went deeper, past the ridgelines, past the frozen creek, into places even the maps don't bother to name." His head turned slowly toward me. I tried not to flinch. We set camp the first night, made a fire, told stories to push back the dark. But it hurt us. His eyes glistened in the low light, hollow and endless. It came after midnight. Tall, thin, bones moving wrong under its skin, teeth like needles. Eyes? No, not eyes. Holes. Empty holes that swallowed the firelight. He shuddered violently. It didn't kill us right away. It played with us. Took Tom first. Left only his tongue. Laid neatly by the firewood. We thought it was an animal at first. Something explainable. Then Caleb started laughing. But it wasn't his laugh. It was wrong. Like something was using his mouth, his voice. He clutched his chest suddenly, digging his fingers into his ribs. The third night, I was alone. It whispered to me. Promises. Lies. It followed me in my dreams and in the spaces between dreams. I ran. I ran until my legs broke and my lungs bled. But you can't outrun it. I swallowed thickly, my throat dry. "What was it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He flinched so hard, I thought he'd strike me. "Not a Wendigo," he breathed. The Wendigo. He said it hunted differently. It didn't just kill. It consumed who you were, piece by piece, memory by memory. It would let you think you escaped, let you stumble free, thinking you'd survived. Only you hadn't. You never had. You were already dead. It just hadn't told your body yet. His voice dropped lower. It stood over me at dawn, its mouth full of Caleb's face. I could see Caleb's teeth, still moving. It bent low and whispered inside my mind, "You're already mine." The lantern guttered. The shadows thickened. He leaned closer. "It's not out there anymore," he hissed. "It's in here." He jammed a bloodied finger against his own chest. I didn't sleep after that. The others returned just before dawn. I briefed them, but there was little to report beyond the survivor's madness. We decided to keep him under constant watch, but when we checked his cot an hour later, he was gone. No broken windows, no torn fabric. The zipper was still latched from the inside. The only thing left behind was a wet stain on the bed. Not blood, not sweat, just moisture, like something cold had melted there. We found a trail of smeared footprints leading into the woods, but a fresh snowfall had buried most of it. We set up motion sensor cameras, posted extra watch rotations. It didn't help. 2 nights later, one of the volunteers vanished. We found what was left of him the next morning, strung up between 2 trees, like laundry on a line. His ribcage was split wide, hollowed out like a canoe. His eyes were missing. His tongue, intact, placed gently on a tree stump nearby. The cameras had captured nothing, just 8 minutes of static between 1:13 and 1:21 a.m. But when we went through the footage frame by frame, in the frozen grain of the static, we found something, standing at the tree line, tall, thin, grinning, and just a few feet in front of it, staring directly at the camera, was the survivor. But he wasn't the same. His mouth hung open wider than any human jaw should allow. His shoulders twisted as if something underneath his skin was trying to burst free. His hands hung limp, the fingers blackened and cracked. His eyes, if they could still be called that, glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. We shut down the camp that day. Everyone but me. I stayed behind to pack up the last of the equipment, to close things properly, alone. The forest was too quiet. Even the birds had fled. When I entered the meat locker to check the inventory one last time, I paused. Something was wrong. The air inside was wrong, wet and heavy, like a grave freshly turned. I turned the corner, and there he was, crouched in the far corner of the locker, naked, his skin pale and torn at the fingertips, like claws were trying to push their way out. His mouth worked silently, chewing on something invisible. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. He looked up at me. His mouth split in a grin so wide it seemed to tear his cheeks. And then I heard it, not with my ears, but deep inside my bones. "You don't have to run anymore." Then he was gone. No sound, no motion, just gone. The room was empty, except for the wet footprints leading back into the snow. I left the camp that night, but something followed me home. Every night now, something breathes at my window. It doesn't knock. It doesn't speak. It just breathes. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, caught between dream and waking, I hear my own breath change, grow heavier, hungrier. And in those moments, I wonder, did I ever really leave the forest? Or did the forest simply come with me? Come with me. I started drinking heavily before bed, sometimes smoking, just to dull the anxiety enough to pass out. It worked. Barely. After a week, the nightmares eased. I told myself it had just been smoke inhalation. A bad trip, my mind filling in the blanks with terror. Another week, and I was almost normal. Almost. The memory started to rot, like a wound trying to scab over. I convinced myself it was behind me, until Cindy found me. I was sitting alone on a park bench, nursing a coffee and staring at the trees. She appeared like a ghost, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid. She looked worried, haunted. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked. I shook my head. "The factory," she said. Every muscle in my body locked up. "You were there," she continued. You weren't moving. I tried to pull you out, but you wouldn't budge. You were just kneeling there, staring into the fire like you were part of it." "What was I looking at?" I asked, throat dry. She shook her head. "I couldn't see. I didn't want to." Her hand brushed my leg. Her skin was cold. "It's good to see you made it," she whispered. "I didn't think you would." She invited me to her apartment that night, promised fried chicken, cheap beer, and horror movies. I said yes, desperate for some human connection to anchor me back to normality. Her apartment was strange, too clean, too empty. No pictures, no decorations, just white walls and a massive, ancient TV sitting on the floor. We ate in silence, the fried chicken turning to sawdust in my mouth. After dinner, she pulled out a battered VHS tape, grinning. "Found footage horror," she said. "You'll love it." She blew dust off a VCR, slotted the tape in. The TV hummed to life, screen flickering black for what felt like forever, before plain white text appeared. Part 1. Static. Then a static shot of an empty field at night. Trees silhouetted against a bloated moon. A dilapidated farmhouse in the distance. The camera didn't move. Minutes crawled bus. Wind whispered through the grass. The only sound. I shifted. Uncomfortable. Cindy said nothing, staring intently at the screen. Finally, the camera jerked forward. A shaky walk through dense forest. No sound but the crunch of boots on dead leaves. The cameraman moved slowly, deliberately. Then the trees cleared, and there it was. The factory. Our factory. My gut twisted. The footage approached the entrance, pushed through. Inside, the burned-out skeleton of the rave was eerily intact, like the fire had never happened. The camera found the stage, stopped. A figure stood there, pale, dark-haired, camcorder in hand, filming. I ripped my gaze from the screen. "What the fuck is this?" I demanded. Cindy smiled, slow and cold. "I thought you liked horror movies," she said. "Where did you get this?" "I've always had it," she said simply. My heart thundered. I bolted, crashing through her apartment door, racing down the hall, lungs tearing for air. Back home, I locked every door, every window. I drank until the room spun, until I could forget her smile. But I couldn't forget. The next morning, I called Jack, a cop I knew, gave him Cindy's address. He promised to check it out. Hours later, he called back. "There's no such address," he said. "Never has been." Panic clawed up my throat. I scoured my memory, trying to remember how I got to her place. But the memory was gone, eaten away like moth-eaten fabric. Dream or not, it felt real, too real. Now, at night, I hear the faint whir of a camcorder lens, adjusting, just beyond the walls. I catch glimpses of pale skin and bulging eyes in the reflections of dark windows. Sometimes I wake to the smell of smoke, thick and cloying. Sometimes I find videotapes on my doorstep, blank labels staring up at me like accusations. I don't watch them. I can't, because deep down, I know what's on them. And I know who's filming. Not Cindy, not the pale cameraman. Me. And somewhere, someone else is sitting alone, staring into the screen, watching as I burn, watching and waiting for their turn, and waiting for. I think the hide behind is real. I just don't think it's what we thought. They say the hide behind lives in the deep places of the forest, where light hesitates and the trees crowd so close their branches knit the sky shut. No one really knows what it looks like, because anyone who glimpses it never lives to speak. It moves soundlessly, just beyond the edges of vision. It follows from behind, always watching. Old woodsmen whispered that it feasted on fear itself, a creature that didn't merely kill you, but hollowed you out from the inside until your mind was just another branch to be snapped off the tree. I grew up scoffing at those stories, superstitions to scare children around campfires, until 2 weeks ago, when I inherited my grandfather's land in the northern Maine woods, and realized that some legends are born from truths too terrible to face. The truck's headlights cut a narrow beam through the pre-dawn fog as I rolled onto the overgrown logging road that led to Grandpa's property. He'd passed last fall, and the land, 400 acres of tangled pines and spruces, had fallen to me by default. I'd always dreaded I'd end up with it, a worthless patch of woods, untouched since Prohibition, where no sane soul ventured after dark. That morning, the air tasted of damp moss and decay. I hopped out, boots sinking into spongy undergrowth. In the weak glow of my headlamp, I surveyed the clearing where Grandpa's old cabin had stood, until a storm 2 years ago snapped its roof off like a matchstick. Now, only weeds and rotting floorboards remained. I hefted my gear: a chainsaw, an axe, marking flags, and a road map scrawled with half-melted notes Grandpa had left in a drawer. He'd written little about this place, just plots, trails, and the warning: stay on the high ground. Never follow the echo. I shrugged it off as Grandpa's eccentricity. After all, echoes don't come in forests. As I stepped into the trees, the world contracted to the circle of my beam. 1,000 pine needles whispered overhead, yet I could feel the silence hugging me, pressing close. An hour in, the work began smoothly. I cleared fallen limbs, stacked logs, planning a rough path through the glade. But every time I turned my back for a moment, something would shift. My orange tape markers vanished. A fallen branch I'd snapped in half, whole again, as if nothing had touched it. I'd stop, listening, and hear nothing but the silence. No birds, no rustle of small creatures. The forest held its breath as I worked. Then came the glimpses. Out of the corner of my eye, something flickering, darker than shadow, darting between trunks. Too tall to be a deer, too slender for a bear, always just out of focus. When I spun around, nothing remained but moss and gloom. By noon, my stomach knotted. I'd dropped my wrench against a stump, and when I turned, it was gone. I hunted within a 3-meter radius. Nothing. No footprints in the damp forest floor. No sign the tool had been anywhere but exactly where I left it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the pines. I gripped my headlamp tighter. The high notes of the branches sounded almost wrong, like a warning cry. I shook my head and pressed on, aware that the forest felt less like home and more like an organism watching my every move. Late afternoon light slanted low when I reached a hollow I'd never noticed. There, half hidden by leaning black pines, sat a shack. Its wood boards were bleached to ash. Windows yawned empty. and the door hung loose on its hinges. No chimney, no sign on any map. Nothing but rot and stillness. I hesitated at the threshold. My tools, my map, all my plans felt trivial next to this thing. A dare welled in my chest. Go on. Step inside. I unsnapped my belt holster. Let the radios clatter to the floor. Only the hush answered. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Swirls of dust motes drifted in feeble shafts of dying sunlight. At the center lay a mound of bones. Twisted, broken. Some human, some animal, fused into a grotesque puzzle under a thin layer of mold. The walls bore carvings, hundreds of gouged symbols. Not words, but eye shapes, dull hollows that seemed to follow me, perched above splintered boards, like vultures waiting for carrion. I felt my pulse hammer, checked my phone, no signal. On a rickety table in the corner lay a leather-bound journal, half covered in pine needles. I flipped it open. The entries were Grandpa's handwriting, neat at first, then scrawling madly. June 3rd. Footprints appear at dawn. Small, slanted. Behavior is odd. The trees, they lean. June 10th. Voices in the walls. Mother thinks I've lost it. June 12th. I saw it. Tall, jointed limbs. No face. Just skin drawn tight. It breathes the dark. My throat went dry. I stuffed the journal into my pack and backed out of the shack. A low creak made me whirl, but the door had swung closed on its own. The sun was a bleeding orb on the horizon when I sprinted to my truck. Behind me, the forest sighed like a dozen lungs. I dared not look back, but every few steps I felt the air grow colder, as though something exhaled just behind me. I slammed inside, locked the doors. The world beyond the windshield shimmered in the dying light. Trees danced at the corner of vision. I fumbled the keys and peeled out, tires spinning on gravel. That night, in a motel just off Route 1, sleep was a twisted labyrinth. Waking bursts of panic. Imagine footsteps on the vinyl floor, shadow figures pressed against the window. In the mirror across the room, I thought I saw a tall shape leaning in, watching. I blinked. It was gone. At dawn, I thought, it's over. I tell myself those stories were real, but maybe they've stayed behind in the forest. Back in my own house, the hide behind did not release me. Doors I'd locked creaked open in the night. Objects moved. 1 minute on the mantel, the next in the hallway. My phone buzzed with static, slicing at my nerves. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror. My reflection seemed delayed, like a broken video feed. I snapped my fingers and watched the mirror still. A figure crouched behind me, slender limbs splayed, ribs paling under the skin. I whirled, but nothing stood there. Lights flickered. The thermostat climbed past 70. I knew I should leave, drive away. But something in me rooted me like the trees of that forest, immobile. By the third day, I was skittering at shadows. I woke to hear breathing through the vent above my bed. Low, wet rasping, like lungs learning to imitate human sound. I lay frozen, sweating in the dark, until I realized the breathing was echoing my own heartbeat. The journal pages had begun to slip from my mind like soggy paper. In my own handwriting, I found scrawled notes. It's here. It knows I know. But I couldn't remember writing them. My phone filled with photos I didn't take. Each one showed my living room, but with something bent and crouching where light shouldn't reach. I'd swipe the screen to enlarge, only to see empty rooms. I could no longer trust sight, sound, or memory. Clocks ran backward. Hallways stretched impossibly long. The floor dipped beneath my feet. as though the house itself were breathing. Neighbors knocked, and I didn't answer. Emails piled up, unanswered. Once a delivery man left a package at my door. I opened it to find a single carved eye, made of bone. I screamed, but the walls drank the sound. The only solution left was destruction. If the hide behind was tied to places, trees, boards, walls, I would burn it out. In the dead of night, I poured gasoline through every crack of my house. My hands shook so violently, I doused the driveway too. I stood at the front, lighter in hand, and the forest beyond the clearing pressed in, shadow shifting like hungry mouths. I clicked the lighter. The flame guttered, then roared. A line of fire bloomed across the floorboards. Flames licked the walls, crackling with fury. The house became a living thing, screaming in heat and smoke. Outside, I barely register the shriek. Many shrieks, like human voices torn through fire. I tripped over my own feet and staggered toward the truck. Through the orange haze, I thought I saw shapes, tall and twisted, crawling within the walls of flame. They writhed against the heat, pressing like insects in a magnifying glass. Their eyeless faces turned toward me in silent accusation. I drove away as the roof collapsed in a thunder of burning timber. The woods behind me glowed red, sparks dancing into the moonlit sky. I parked by the roadside under a flickering street lamp. For a moment, I believed the fire had purged the evil, but the light buzzed sickly, dipping in brightness. The breathing returned, subtler now, but everywhere, beneath the truck seat, in the rustle of plastic bags in the bed, in the engine's idling pulse. I peered out the windshield. Standing at the edge of the tree line, as still as a gravestone, was a tall shape. No face, skin drawn tight over empty sockets. It cocked its head, as though curious. Then it strode forward, limbs bending at impossible angles, into the ring of streetlight. I ducked. My heart thundered. In the rearview mirror, I caught its reflection, and it smiled with teeth too many to be human. During my 7th grade year of middle school, there was a girl in my class who suddenly took a liking to me. We'll call her Stacy. It was obvious that she liked me, but I didn't care too much about it, especially since, at the time, it didn't really bother me. A couple of weeks passed since she had made it readily apparent that she had a crush on me. I was at home in my basement when I got a text on my phone. It was from a random number that I had never seen before. And even weirder, I had never given out my iCloud account to anyone from school, and the email itself was random enough that no one could have guessed what it was. I didn't have a phone number at the time anyways. A couple of minutes later, I eventually found out that it was Stacy texting me. I entertained the conversation because I didn't want to be mean and just ignore her. And she started texting me every day, like clockwork. At the time, I had a crush on this girl, Amanda, and the Halloween dance was coming up. And about a week before the dance, I got a text from Stacy in this text thread. She finally confessed her feelings for me. I told her that I didn't return those feelings, and that I was sorry, trying to be as respectful as possible. Stacy then texted me back, saying she knew that it was a long shot that I'd like her back, because she already knew who I liked. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, what? How does she know that? So I asked, how do you know who I like? And she told me Amanda, and said that her friend had told her, the friend she mentioned, just having to be dating my friend, the same friend that I had confided in about my crush. I asked, did my friend tell you about who I liked? And she replied, yes. And I was pretty angry. The next day, I confronted my friend, and he swore that he hadn't told anyone. I trusted him, and later that night, I confronted Stacy, and she admitted that she had lied. She figured out who I liked just by staring at me so much. I didn't even know what to say, other than yelling at her to stop talking to me. Fast forward to that summer, and she was still texting me every day, telling me how she needed to get over me. And I mean every day, for about 2 weeks. I kept telling her that she would find someone else who liked her and cared for her, and that I just wasn't the one. And eventually, I got tired of it and told her that if she was really going to get over me, she needed to stop talking to me. And she got angry, and I told her to stop contacting me. And I thought that that was it. But I was so wrong, as the worst was yet to come. Fast forward to my birthday. In the 8th grade, I thought everything had blown over. By then, half a year had passed, and I had put it all behind me. That morning, I got to school and saw that Stacy had taped a drawing to my locker, wishing me a happy birthday. I took the drawing off, shoved it into my locker, and completely forgot about it for the rest of the day. That night, when my friends were over, Stacy texted me and asked why I didn't say thank you for the drawing. I apologized, saying that I had a lot going on that day, and she accepted it and thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to multiple texts from her telling me how I was wrong for not saying thank you. And at that point, I had finally had enough and just blocked her. Near the end of the school year, we were assigned an essay about a lesson that we had learned in life. It was a pretty easy assignment until I realized that we had to present it in front of the class. My school was small, with only about 40 kids per grade, and each grade was split into 2 sections. So it wasn't the worst thing to present in front of everyone until it was the day arrived when we had to present I believe, essays. When Stacy waddled up to the front of the class and announced that her essay title, Love is a Delicate Matter, and I thought to myself, God, what if this is about me? And it was the entire essay. Top to bottom was about her confessing her love for me. And at the end, she completely slandered me, calling me a jerk that was never worth liking. To begin with, the worst part, the way word traveled in our school. There were no secrets. Everyone had already known that she had liked me since 7th grade. And it was one of the most embarrassing moments I have ever had to sit through. Not to mention, she got a standing ovation. People were crying, and my friends were laughing their butts off. Even the teachers were laughing. I only had one thought for the rest of the day. What just happened? And I thought that this was finally the end of it, but I was wrong again. A couple of years passed, and nothing crazy has happened since until my junior year. A good buddy of mine told me that he needed to talk to me about something important, and we met up in the stairwell, and he told me that Stacy had made a play about us in middle school. Yeah, a full-on play to present in front of an actual crowd. And I was baffled. The girl made her whole upbringing about a middle school crush. And it turns out they recorded the play, and I finally got to watch it this year. It was terrible. And I mean, I wanted to pull my eyes out. Kind of bad. And I also saved her essay. That's pretty bad too. Anyways, I just graduated, and I hope I never see this dumb again. My name is Ellie, and I'm 24, from Topeka, Kansas. I want to tell you about the single worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've been a fan of your channel for a long time, and I'd always hoped that nothing worth writing to you about would ever actually happen to me. But it seems my luck has finally run out. But I don't want to just share my story with you. I actually need your help. And by the end of my story, I think you'll understand why it all started around 18 months ago, which right now feels like a whole entire lifetime ago. I first encountered him, or at least I think I first encountered him, at the diner where I used to work. I was a waitress, the kind who smiles at everyone, even the weirdos. And while he was one of those quiet types, tall, thin, with greasy black hair that hung over his eyes, all mumbles and no eye contact, at least at first anyway, I remember he wore a gray hoodie, most days stained at the sleeves, like he hadn't washed it in quite a while. And then he'd sit in the corner booth for hours on end, just kind of nursing some black coffee. But it was only ever a black coffee, and I didn't think much of him at first. People come and people go, but this particular guy just sort of kept staring at me, not in a flirty sort of notey me way either. His eyes were cold, like he was studying me, or maybe even sizing me up. Then came the night that I caught him watching me through the window as I locked up, and I told myself that it was nothing, just some weirdo lonely guy who thought that I was pretty and hadn't been taught that it was rude to stare. But it wasn't long before things started to get really creepy. About a week later, I found a note slipped under my front door. It was sort of scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper, and it said, "You look pretty in blue." Today, my work uniform wasn't blue. Not at all, but what had actually been blue were the underwear that I've been wearing that day. And in that moment, my stomach dropped. I lived alone. No one was supposed to know what I was wearing underneath, and my uniform didn't show anything off either. I checked the locks, the windows, and everything seemed fine. I threw the note away and told myself that it was nothing, maybe a prank, possibly by some local kids, I guess. And I tried to reassure myself with stuff like that, but it didn't work. And I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, and things got way, way worse over the weeks that followed. I started seeing the guy everywhere, not up close, just glimpses here and there, at a distance, a shadow. Across the street, when I walked home, a figure standing under the street light outside my house, at night, but I really never knew. I didn't always see his face, but it really felt like it was him. Once, I swore that I saw him in the grocery store, 2 aisles over, peeking through the cereal boxes, and I turned to look, and he was already gone. I knew that I was probably being paranoid, and that I was imagining things overworked, overstressed, no sleep, all that kind of stuff. But the notes kept coming, and it would say stuff like, "I like your hair down. You shouldn't leave your curtains open. And I'm closer than you think." Each note in this childlike handwriting of his, it made my skin crawl a little more. Each time I got one, and on the advice of a friend, I stopped throwing them away and instead kept them in a shoebox as proof that something was very, very wrong. I prayed things would get better, but to get bored of me. But the situation got even worse. As time went by, I'd hear footsteps behind me on my way home from work. But when I turned, no one was there. My trash can started getting knocked over, and once I found a dead bird on my porch. Its little neck had been snapped, and its feathers were all over the steps, where somebody had apparently been ripping them out. And the notes get even creepier too. "I can hear you breathing at night, or you can't hide from me." And I almost stopped sleeping altogether. I'd sit up with the lights on, just clutching my knife, waiting for something to happen, and I knew that he was out there watching and getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move on me. But in the end, I couldn't take it anymore and told my neighbor Tom about it now. He's an older guy, Tom. Pretty sure he's in his 50s, with a very kind face, big belly, and a loud laugh. And he lived across the street from me, and we'd always wave to each other. One afternoon, I knocked on his door, pretty much shaking at that point, and just spilled my guts about everything that had been happening, the notes, the footprints, that sickening feeling of being hunted, and I told him how scared I was, that the whole thing seemed to be getting worse and worse with each passing day, and that I was scared that the guy stalking me was going to actually end up hurting me. I remember him frowning, putting a hand on my shoulder, and told me that I wasn't alone. You see anything weird, you call me, okay? He told me day or night, I'll come running. I nodded, grateful for the offer of help that I don't think I can even put into words. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I actually had someone on my side. But the stalking didn't stop, and the notes slowly turned into what I perceived to be threats. I'll cut your pretty throat. No one can save you. I'm coming for you soon. It would say I stopped going outside unless I had to, and I checked the locks 10 times a night, sometimes. And then one night, he made everything fall apart. I was in my kitchen, making tea to calm my nerves, when I saw him a figure walking up my driveway, tall, thin, moving very slowly, like he didn't care if I actually saw him. And that was like his signature. I guess how I'd always know that it was him. My heart stopped in my chest. This was it. It was actually here to kill me. Obviously, I finally ran to the phone and dialed 911. I told them that someone's trying to break into my house. My voice was shaky, and I tried to whisper, "Please hurry." The operator told me to stay calm and told me that help was on the way. But all the same, I grabbed my cell phone and called Tom, my neighbor. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up, and I remember thinking, come on. But I still got nothing, no answer, no voicemail, no nothing. I hung up, and there was panic starting to rise up inside my chest because I knew the cops wouldn't get there in time, and I was completely and totally on my own. I had a gun, a little handgun, my dad gave me when I moved out, and I've never used it, but I kept it loaded on my nightstand. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was quiet, but I could feel him out there waiting. I crouched in the dark, gun just pointed at the front door, praying that the cops would show up first. And these minutes dragged by my palms, were sweaty, slipping on the grip of the gun, and then out of nowhere, bam! The door flew open, kicked hard, splintering the frame, before a shadow stepped inside very quickly. And in that moment, I didn't think I just screamed and pulled the trigger. 3 shots loud and sharp, making my ears ring. This person grunted and fell sprawled on the floor. I dropped the gun, and I was shaking, like I'd never before in my entire life. Before I stumbled down the stairs, the lights were off and I could see blood pulling on the hardwood floor. And there was lots of it, too. I flipped the switch, feeling the sick kind of relief, and knowing that my problems were about to be buried, 6 feet deep. But when I flicked that light switch on, my entire world had fell apart. There wasn't the stalker, lying there bleeding out in my hallway. It was my neighbor Tom. His kind face was pale, his chest torn open from the bullets, and he'd been holding an FL flashlight, not even a weapon. And I remember sobbing before falling to my knees. I cried out that I was sorry, that I didn't know, and he was just wheezing, blood bubbling at his lips as he struggled to breathe. And then he just went still. I pressed my hands to his chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. and he died right there. And when the police arrived minutes later, I was still screaming, covered in Tom's blood, trying to revive him. Before they pulled me off, paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but I already knew that there was no saving him. After I explained everything that had happened, the cops put me in handcuffs and took me to their station, and I told them everything about that stalker, about the notes, and the threats I showed them, the shoebox full of all of this evidence, and felt totally vindicated in doing so too, because it all made keeping that box of cursed paper finally worth it. I told them that I thought my stalker was at the door, that he'd come to kill me, and that I didn't think Tom had seen my calls, let alone piece together what was happening. They listened and wrote it all down. But then, instead of being sympathetic, their face was very cold, like they didn't believe me. They later told me, at around 3 in the morning, that Tom died on the operating table, and all I could do was sit there in that cold interrogation room, feeling completely numb, and then I cried until I couldn't anymore. The police searched my house, my yard, the whole neighborhood. They looked into the stalker, asked me for his name, description, really anything, and I told them what I knew, that he was tall and thin, with greasy hair and a gray hoodie. And they checked the diner's security footage, asking my co-workers about him, but no one but me could remember seeing this guy, or really have any inclination as to who he was. They went through the notes, the footprints, the dead bird, but when they came back they said that the handwriting on the notes matched my handwriting, the footprints matched my own boots, and as for that bird, they said that I could have just done it myself. There's no evidence of anyone else. They told me just you, and they sent me to a psychiatrist. She's been a stern woman, with glasses, scribbling notes. While I talked, I told her that I wasn't crazy, that my stalker was real, and that he'd been after me for months on end. She'd asked about my life, my job, and my family. If I was lonely, I said I was fine, that I was just scared. But she didn't believe me either. And then, after days of tests, they decided that I really was crazy, delusional. They called it unfit to stand a trial. And they said that I made my stalker up, that the stress of living alone and working almost constantly broke me down, shattered my mind, and turned me into what became a killer. They then locked me in some psych ward instead of a jail, a place with white walls, padded doors, and nurses who now look at me like I'm some kind of monster. But I'm not crazy. My stalker was real. I've seen him with my own eyes. I felt him watching me. The notes, the threats, they weren't in my head. They couldn't have been. I didn't kill Tom on purpose. I swear to Jesus Christ in heaven that I thought that he was my stalker, come to finally kill me. Or worse, I thought killing him meant saving myself. But now he's dead, and I'm trapped here, either drugged up or tied down, and watched every second, and they won't listen. None of them will ever listen, and they think I'm a liar, a murderer, a lunatic, but I know that you'll believe me, your audience. You wouldn't have gotten this far if you didn't, right? So please, I'm begging you to believe me, and I'm begging you, and everyone who listens to you, to help me find him, that man in the gray hoodie, because he's still out there. I know it. He's watching, waiting for the next girl whose life he's going to ruin. I'm not insane. I didn't just imagine him. And if you don't help me, he'll keep going. And no one will stop him. Search for those notes, the footprints, anything, and prove that I'm telling the truth. If you can get this to your audience and get me out of here, I will be infinitely grateful. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to be buried in here. And I were silent for a second, frozen, and I looked at him and mouthed, Running that, a second, we both sprinted back to his apartment at full speed. Tommy never looked back. As he fumbled to flash his keycard at the locked door, I caught a glimpse of the man's uneven gait as he sped toward us. The door unlocked, and we ran into the lobby, slamming the automatically locking door behind us. We sprinted up the stairs to his floor, where we finally caught our breath. Tommy had a look of pure disbelief in his eyes, and I was shaking with adrenaline. To this day, I have no clue how the man could have followed me 20 mil and known exactly where I was. The level of surveillance that would have required made me feel sick. Tommy was rattled, but he left law the next day, and I stayed for another week. But between finals and packing, I never left my apartment. I don't think I'll ever know what that man wanted, or why he harassed me for months. By no means do I want this to deter people from helping the less fortunate. But in rare instances, good deeds can come at unknowingly dark cost. I'd like to say that I don't regret helping him, but I do. When I return to LA in the fall, I'll be in the dorms, as will Tommy. But somehow that man found me across 20 miles. So what's to say that he won't find me again, just a few hundred feet from my old apartment? I can't call the police. What would I even say? He never technically did anything wrong, and law is full of vagrants far outside the concern of law enforcement. And I won't tell my parents either. They'd probably kill me for keeping this from them all year. All I can do is wonder what will happen this fall, and I guess only time will tell. So this was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, and now, one of my favorite stories to tell. Now that I'm no longer scared, I've moved 1,000 miles away. In a few years' time has passed, so my husband was in the military during this time, and I was a housewife due to work being hard for me to get in my area that I was in, as I can't drive, and lived off base. Well, any military person knows that a military schedule is pretty darn predictable, and much of our lives ran on an easy-to-memorize routine. And to make matters worse, my husband was often gone for long hours for about 2 to 3 months. I had been seeing this guy wandering around my home peeking in windows. Honestly, I didn't originally think much of it. Beyond being weirded out, we didn't have anything that would interest a robber. No TV, a single 7-year-old computer, a broken couch and table, and a mattress on the floor. Literally nothing expensive in our home, beyond a gun that was locked up in a safe that might have looked like it had valuables. But that's a lot of work for what looked like a home of people living in Pody. So I didn't think anything of it yet. He kept coming back when my husband was gone. I'd seen him every few days, or hear him due to my normally super sweet cat at the time, hating him, hissing and yelling when he saw him, so I'd know that he was there. When I'd hear my cat making an angry fuss. One day I went out with my husband, and I guess I didn't lock the door properly or something, as our lock could be a bit finicky, and I was running late. According to our normal schedule, I would have gone to base with my husband for a family mandatory fun event, and came back home alone, and an Uber, while my husband stayed at the base to work or hang out with his friends. And what ended up happening was that I fell sick with a migraine. I have hemiplegic migraine, so it can actually be pretty serious. And his sergeant told him to take me home and take care of me when he saw me. Not before I go on, I should probably describe my old home. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment complex in the mountains. It was a massive complex. My home layout was this. My front door led to my kitchen and dining area, and the wall next to my door had another glass door, I think a patio, and across from my kitchen was my room. Then you go down the hall, and hit the living room, which had another glass door wall next to the fireplace. And finally, after that, you go across the living room at the end of the hall and reach our guest room, or my plant room, cat's playroom, SLG guest room, which had yet another glass door. I was literally surrounded by giant glass doors. And outside we had a porch, and on the porch was a storage closet where I usually kept my bike since I couldn't drive due to my migraines and seizures now. Back to the story, now that I've set the scene. When my husband brought me home again, not per our normal schedule, we arrived to find our door slightly ajar. We gave each other a look and went inside anyway, with me mumbling that I must not have locked it properly due to being in a rush that morning. We walked into the kitchen, where my husband immediately went to the fridge, looking around for water for himself and me. He then spoke for the first time in the fridge. Honestly, I don't even remember what he said, but a few seconds after he spoke, we heard something our porch glass door at the back of our home moved, and we both knew that sound really well, since I like to sit in the porch, reading for hours, so I was always coming in and out. He grabbed my shoulder and whispered for me to grab his gun from our room. He then grabbed a knife and went toward the living room. I went and grabbed the gun, noticing on my way into our room that our living room glass porch door was wide open, and upon giving my husband the gun and following behind him, I dialed 911 in my panic, saying I had an active break-in while my husband did a sweep of our home. I walked back down the hall toward the kitchen to see if the intruder had gone around the back to the front. The only way out of the area he went. We lived on a literal mountainside, and one side was blocked off out back. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college, and also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led to me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and placed me in a group that was supposed to teach interview skills. In order to fix that, the group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group, or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers. But that's not really relevant to the story, and the other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me, and obviously didn't share any of my interests. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of the one member I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic, like John, so that's what I'll call him. JN immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their instruction to the course to complain that him being there was useless since he would be retiring in a few years anyway, and no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction that he wanted, I assumed the rest of the group just thought that he was a weirdo or attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course, and he waited until we had been given the paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but she was a lying jerk and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial, or any evidence or bruises or other injuries before that either. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and sent him to jail. Those are his words. And this immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true crime channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never never even happened or didn't leave visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. And I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him, regardless of which one it was, and would avoid interacting with him as much as possible, outside of just polite hell and passing him things if he asked. And like I said before, I didn't really interact much with the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, spent the dinner break in the library, while the men all snuck off to the pub and then went home immediately. After the second half was over, no one ever asked me how I spent my breaks. And since the pub and library were in opposite directions and couldn't be seen from the front of the building where the group met due to the way the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I'd been. And that made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, on one particular day, I bumped into a friend during my dinner break and decided to put off visiting the library until after the course was over so I could catch up with them instead. When I finally got around to it, I spent at least a quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books. I ended up being drawn into a conversation with the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, one that was getting a new movie the full following year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with chatting with a friendly man around my age who shared my interests after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We've been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, looking confused and concerned. He had just opened his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by the shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touch without warning and would never have done that to me. So I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger. I knocked their hands away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face. And as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing that he would find me there and how I practically lived in the library before chattering away. As if we were close friends, I was very confused. It was obvious that he had just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but JN had kept behind while the group was leaving because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly. And as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of knowing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left shortly after me and simply seen me go inside while walking in the same direction, he would have come in by then. The only way it made sense for him to know, to look for me there, and joke that I practically lived there was if he somehow learned that I was going to the library during my dinner breaks, knew that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I wouldn't go after the meeting instead. What made this even stranger was the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions, and mostly ignored me, the same way that I ignored him, unless we were forced to interact for some reason. So why he was now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close was very odd. While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in and asked if I knew him. He had obviously noticed my negative reaction to being touched And when I briefly explained the situation, the librarian politely asked John to leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to insist that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't, and how ridiculous it would be to claim that an 18-year-old girl and a 50-some or 60-some old man were friends in the first place, when the librarian asked again, outright stating that harassing other customers was not acceptable and that John would be removed if he refused to leave alone. John smiled and agreed to leave, but in the tone that you would use to humor a child. And then, after walking out, he very obviously stationed himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave. As well, the librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on. I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to figure out that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure Johan left me alone. But his break was several hours away. If I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening. And since I couldn't stay, he asked me to at least come in the next time that I was there, to let him know that I was safe. And he reluctantly watch me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was, and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we weren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on mine, he corrected me and stated that we both needed the numerous such and such bus, and telling me where he lived, which in fact was on the same bus route as me. And although I was tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, or even sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the way home, it was clear that he was going to follow me. He still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away, and there were several dark alleys along the way that I had no intention of going near. While in his company, when I had agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he finally let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were still good friends again. When we reached the stop, John kept walking, which seemed odd, but I hoped that my lack of response had finally made him give up and leave me alone. Or maybe he had confused that stop with another further along, and I could run while his back was turned. But no such luck. As soon as he had realized that I wasn't following, he came back, frowning, as if he were confused, and asked, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I bluntly told him no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him. When that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned wanting coffee while leaving the classroom. That was an obvious lie, since I don't drink coffee, and I told him so. John's only response was to say I didn't have to get coffee and keep pushing me to go to a cafe with him when I firmly refused. He apparently took that his not wanting to drink in public because then he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we got there, I wasn't to worry because that was his 18-year-old daughter. Because, of course, an 18-year-old would just definitely be lounging around naked on her father's furniture in front of him. Right, other people at the stop were staring at us now, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18, and I firmly told John that I didn't want to go to his flat and to leave me alone, and he completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and saying that I was at least 29, when most people at the time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. At that moment, the bus arrived, and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe if necessary. The driver would just throw him off. But no, I sat in an aisle seat to block John from sitting next to me. But he physically shoved me across the seat, pinning me against the window so tightly I could barely move. He pressed his knees against the seat in front to make sure that I had no way to get past him unless he allowed it, and the ride felt endless. He kept touching me, trying to convince me to go to his flat, and although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men, they would quickly look away or become very interested in their phones. As soon as I got home, I emailed the instructor, explained everything, and asking to switch groups. She ignored it for an entire week until I followed up, threatening to involve the police, and their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early, instead essentially kicking me out. If I were the problem, I saw John a few times after that, but fortunately, he never noticed me or approached me again, and I hope it stays that way.